What's up, dudes and dudettes? I want to share with you a story about my first and my second negligent discharge. What is a negligent discharge and why is it important and why do we got to talk about it? So a negligent discharge is sometimes referred to as accidental discharge, but there's a perspective in our industry, the gun training business, where people would say there is no such thing as an accident. I think there is such thing as an accident. It truly is something that you did not foresee and you did not plan for, and you had no way of stopping. That's what we could call an accident. So, if two people are moving and they bump into each other, one person trips, is that negligence? Maybe, maybe not. I don't really think so. Unless you specifically set it up so that people would bump into each other and trip, that's different. But if people honestly just trip, that's not negligent. On the other hand, if they're running with their finger on the trigger, and then they trip and they fall and they discharge, tripping and falling was an accident, but discharging was negligent because you'd set yourself up for failure by leaving your finger on the trigger. Now, do you see the difference? There are accidents. There are things which are unaccounted for, unplanned for, unpredictable, and that they do happen. But in this video, we're going to talk about negligent discharges. So let's define that. A negligent discharge is someone who could have, should have, would have known better, except he didn't know better, or he chose to do things this way anyways, for whatever reasons, because of laziness, because of carelessness, because of recklessness, because he overestimated his abilities, or because he was just ignorant. So there's really only three things in gun safety that matter. One is where do you point the gun? The second one is where do you put your finger? Is it on the trigger or is it off the trigger? And if it's off the trigger, then where? The third factor that really matters is the gun loaded and how is it loaded? So this is not to say that there's rules and then we break rules. That's not what this is about. And anybody who's teaching you as rules that you memorize that you never violate, that's going to be a problem because there's always a time that you're going to have to violate or make exceptions to these rules. So forget the whole idea of having rules. Let's not learn this as a rule itself. Let's learn this as a principle or as a guideline or as a fundamental question that we need to be asking ourselves. Where is my gun pointing? Where is my trigger finger? How is my gun loaded, or if it's loaded at all? All right, so I was 21 years old. I bought my first handgun. Spent a lot of time playing airsoft as a kid. Spent a lot of time handling, air rifles and stuff. I spent a lot of time, shooting rifles and shotguns and black powder pistols and things of that nature before turning 21. Turned 21 under California law at the time because that's where I grew up. I could purchase my first handgun. On my 21st birthday, I was in Aid's gun shop in Orange, California, and I purchased a Springfield Armory GI 1911 in .45 caliber. Not long thereafter, took some friends out and we went up in the mountains in San Bernardino. If you're from Southern California, you know what I'm talking about. Way up in the mountains, and we were driving around and exploring and went to do a little bit of shooting in some of the public forest, national forest public shooting areas. And so I had, finished up doing whatever I was doing and went to unload the gun, unloaded the gun, didn't think much about it, pointed at the ground, pressed the trigger, bang! Right? Of course, was the gun unloaded? The answer is no. And this is why it's so important to understand that the gun is loaded until you can inspect it, right? So the definition of a loaded gun, the definition of an unloaded gun, this is an unloaded gun because you can inspect inside the chamber right here, or what we call the breech, the back of the barrel where it opens, and you can inspect into the chamber, through the breech, into the chamber, that there's obviously nothing in there. In fact, even if there was something in there, the gun is non-functioning. It can't shoot right now because of the way this thing is built, because of the mechanism, it can't fire. So this gun is defunct. It is inert. It is completely turned off. It doesn't do anything. It's just a machine, a thing at this point. Like, it's not a gun. It doesn't have any magical superpowers at this point that causes it to be dangerous. On the other hand, once I close this, now we have a firearm which can be dangerous because you can't see inside this breech. You can't look inside the chamber. You can't open the action to inspect it. So at this point, there's a 50-50 chance maybe the gun is functioning, maybe the gun is non-functioning. What I mean by that is there might be a round in the chamber, and there's only one that it could possibly be in there. There's only space for one round. But maybe that chamber has one round, maybe the chamber has 0 rounds, but we don't actually know. And so facing this conundrum of not knowing, we have to make a decision. Do we assume that it has one in it, or do we assume that it has nothing in it? And of course, we assume that there's one in the chamber, unless you can actively and visually verify, or even physically put your finger in there and verify. So here I am, 21 years old, don't know a thing. Get my first gun, take my friends out shooting, think we're really cool, we're up in the mountains. I do my shooting, I unload the gun. Of course, I fail to properly unload the gun, and I go to press the button, press the trigger, and I fire the gun into the dirt, which is only about 3 feet away from my friend's legs. So the bullet impacts the dirt right there. I look at him, he looks at me, I kind of give a nervous laugh. He kind of just like, I don't remember exactly the rest of it. I didn't think much about it at the time because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. It didn't occur to me how severe that was. It did not make sense to me how serious of an infraction that was and why that's so important, because no one had taken the time to explain this to me. So now, well more than 10 years later, let's go and talk about this. And let me share with you the experience that I've gone through, so that way you can put it into perspective and why it's important that you make sure you don't have a negligent discharge and that you work actively to prevent it. So obviously, where did I fail? I failed in messing up the loading procedures. Like, just to be clear as we review this, the unloading procedure, we have a modern handgun, a modern magazine-fed rifle. The proper unloading procedure is going to be magazine out first, clear the chamber, lock the chamber open, and inspect. There's 3 steps. But if you do those steps in the wrong sequence, you will end up thinking that the gun's unloaded, yet the gun is still loaded. And of course, it's a huge problem, right? And so let's suppose that we have a loaded gun. And if I do the sequence wrong, which would be clear the chamber first and take out the magazine second, now I think that the gun is unloaded, but I've actually done the steps in the wrong order. They're still around in this chamber, and it's still very, very, very dangerous. And this is how people kill themselves or kill their spouse or kill their kid or kill their dog or shoot their car with an unloaded gun. How the hell is that possible? It's because you make this mistake, and it's a very common mistake. It's a very dangerous mistake. This is why you must open and inspect it before you can assume that the gun is unloaded. So here I am. I've cleared the gun, but I failed to do it properly. And the second failing is pushing the trigger or pressing the trigger or pulling the trigger in a casual or nonchalant or dismissive manner, right? So every time you press the trigger, and it's okay to press the trigger, it's okay to dry fire the gun. It's okay to dry fire the gun. It's okay to push the trigger. It's very healthy as far as practice and becoming familiar with your trigger. But if you push the trigger without thinking that you're pushing the trigger, you just push it without thinking about it. There's no reason why you pulled the trigger. You just pulled the trigger out of habit. That is dangerous. Every time we press the trigger, it's like stepping on the gas pedal of your car. Every time you step on the gas in your car, you must assume that the car is going to go. Now, if the car is turned off, obviously it's not going to go anywhere, right? Is it wrong to step on the gas? No, it's not wrong. But you better be thinking about what's going to happen when you step on the gas, because when you step on the gas, chances are it will start moving. So because I had grown up playing with BB guns and no one had guided me on these things, I had allowed myself to build up an immense amount of bad habits. And again, this goes with any young people or anybody who's casually playing with toy guns or casually playing with airsoft guns, or dare I say, casually playing with real guns without any formal training. So now that I've been through that and I made that mistake, I hope you don't make the same mistakes. Even if you're handling a fake gun, even if it's an airsoft gun or a BB gun or a pellet rifle or a paintball gun, or you're dry handling, a real firearm at home where you got a first 22, these are habit building experiences, and how you handle that will later on cross over into how you handle a live firearm, a real firearm. And so it's never acceptable that you say, oh, well, it's just a fake gun, or oh, well, it's not loaded, or oh, well, I'm not even pointing it at you. That's not acceptable, because you're making excuses now for poor gun handling. That leads into poor habits, that leads into unsafe behavior, which leads into negligent discharges, which leads into accidentally killing someone that you care about. It's very serious. It's extremely serious. So let me tell you about my second negligent discharge. Now this gets interesting. This was probably about 2018. I was a professional firearms trainer at that point for many years already. Been already doing this business for, 6 or 7 years. I was traveling in Florida. I was at my friend's house, my assistant instructor, Sean, And Sean has a little daughter running around, and of course they got a bunch of Nerf guns in the house. And he's showing me how cool this Nerf gun that his daughter's got is. And so I'm playing with this Nerf gun. I'm like, man, this thing is so sick. I wish I had one of these when I was a kid. Like, look how cool this Nerf gun is, you know? It's got magazines you take out. And anyways. And I allowed myself for just a tiny, tiny moment to be complacent and to relax and to think, oh, well, this is just a toy gun. The rules don't apply to the toy gun. And then I was thinking to myself, I wonder how heavy this trigger is. I wonder what the trigger is like on this toy gun. Boy, this trigger seems to be awfully crisp for a toy gun. And I was thinking about the trigger. And of course, when you think about something with your hands, you do those things with your hands. If you look someplace with your eyes, you're gonna go someplace with your head and with your hands and your body. It's like riding a motorcycle. If you learn how to ride a motorcycle, to tell you, look where you wanna go. Don't look on the edge of the cliff. Because if you look at the edge of the cliff, your body will naturally and instinctively and subconsciously start veering towards that direction and start leaning in that direction. So here I am. I'm thinking about the trigger on this toy Nerf gun. And I'm like, oh, this Nerf gun's pretty darn cool. It's got a really nice, really crisp, really light trigger. I wonder, and I started to let myself just lapse on the principles of gun safety and thinking, oh, it's just a toy gun. Bang! I fire this Nerf gun and the dart flies out of the gun and bounces off the wall in my friend's living room, in Sean's living room. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, that was a real negligent discharge right there. It does not matter that there's a fake gun. It did not matter that it's a fake gun. That's not important at all. What's important is that I let myself become complacent, that I let myself lapse and stop thinking about gun safety, and I let myself sneak over into bad habits, such as to do what we call whoopee checking, to press the trigger just to feel it, just to see how it feels like. And I'd done that with a loaded gun. It was a Nerf gun, so there's no consequence, all right? So there was no consequence about this. But what it is a good opportunity to have a harsh reminder, a good, gentle reminder, but a very serious reminder that if you're complacent, this could happen at any point, at any time, with any gun that you're picking up. So there you have it. Professional firearms instructor, negligent discharge with a Nerf gun, okay? And of course, fortunately, because it's a Nerf gun, there's no consequence, there's no ill consequence, but there is a healthy chance to learn the lesson. But in my business so far, I've seen on average every year we get, 3 or 4 negligent discharges in a year with students. Just to be clear about this, I work with a lot of students and they're all of different skill levels and experience levels. And so it's really the ones that overestimate their abilities and they're pushing themselves beyond their limits, their safe operating limits, and they're the ones that tend to have negligent discharges because they don't have a good foundation and they're trying to do things which are too complicated for their limited skill and limited safety habits to basically safely handle. So we have had a couple negligent discharges. One guy who came out of the holster with a gun similar to this, and as the gun's coming out of the holster, he's using his thumb to push the safety down. You can see this movement, safety down. But what you have to understand is these 2 fingers are wired together, and these 3 fingers are wired together in your nervous system. And so as he's controlling this, he doesn't have a good position of his trigger finger, right? So when you apply this trigger finger, it should be on the side of the gun. It should not be floating in front of the trigger. It should not be on the trigger guard. None of this is acceptable. It cannot be in the trigger well. It cannot be on the trigger guard, and it cannot be floating or even curved outside the trigger guard, because if it's not doing something, if it's not working, then what's going to happen is when you go to press your thumb down, your thumb, we have an opposable thumb. What does it oppose? It opposes your index finger. And so when you try to push the thumb down, naturally he presses the trigger. And so he pulls the gun out of his holster and he's trying to get 2 hands on it. He's got the safety down and bang, he presses the trigger and he has a negligent discharge right there. It's facing downrange. It doesn't hurt anybody. We continue and we learn about it, okay? So that was one. Another one was one of my students who had a very experienced student, and he had a small AR-15 and 300 blackout, and I don't know what he was doing with it. He was doing something with it. And he had let himself just press the trigger, because I think people who are most experienced with guns, they just kind of know that they're handling their gun. They're familiar with it. They press the buttons without even thinking about it. And very similar to my incident with the negligent discharge with the Nerf gun, he comes out of his exercise and he's, his body is up and stressed and active and alert. And he's kind of winding down. He's standing in line during a class. And I don't know what he does, but he works the trigger and he fires the gun directly down between his feet. And I don't know exactly the whole story. You'd have to ask him. So maybe we can pick on him later for a different video. But yeah, so that was one. That was a learning experience. Another one was exactly as I described, a guy who's really not there. This was in Florida. A guy who's really not there and not in his not within his safe limits. He's trying to push himself beyond his limits, and he doesn't know where his limit. He doesn't know that he doesn't have that material. Like he doesn't know where his limits are, and because that's really unsafe, right? So he's trying to get stressed. He's trying to push through this material, and we're yelling at the class and getting him stressed out and doing exercises and stuff. So he's running and he's got his finger on the trigger, and we're like, get your fucking finger out of that trigger well. And so he's running. He fires the gun downrange, and we stop and yell at him, and all is well. That one, there was a whole drama about that because some guy was filming it because he was having a great time and live streaming it on Facebook. Some other douchebag by the name of Jeff Quinney, that's for you, Jeff Quinney, was on Facebook or whatever, Facebook Live, and he's filming it off his laptop. So we got a guy who's in class who's live streaming it on his phone, and then it's playing on Facebook on a laptop, and then we have a guy using a cell phone recording off a laptop, and he gets like a 40 or 50 second clip of this. It's a whole shitstorm about this guy having his negligent discharge, and you just watch him. He's just like, I'm overwhelmed. Of course, and this other guy on the interwebs wants to make a big deal about this and pick on me about it. And, you'll learn that as you get into business, if you get into your own business, there's always going to be people who are critical of you. And they don't necessarily have a good foundation for why they're criticizing. They just want to criticize because that's how they feel good about themselves. So, I pity those people. I think that I'm above that. And I think you're above that. But some people are not above that. So, moving forward. So that was in Florida a couple years ago, probably about 2016 or 2017. Probably 2017 now. So then there was a gal in Southern California who was on a very cold day, and she jammed her Glock back down into her holster at the end because she's stressed out. And we're like, hey, don't take it. Just take it slow. Never be in a rush to put your handgun away. You're never in a hurry to slam this gun back in the holster. But of course, she rushed that. And as she rushed this, she gets her clothing stuck into the holster because it's a very cold day. It's actually snowing on that day in Southern California. And she went to remove the gun from the holster. So obviously, if you push the gun down, you're using your hand and pushing down, not a problem. But then when she pulls the gun out, she's using her fingers to pull out. And of course, naturally, the 4 fingers go on the front of the gun, or the bottom, I should say. 4 fingers go on this area, and she pulls up, or like this, pulls up. And so she discharges in her holster. Boy, that bullet goes in through her jeans, and then it goes out from her jeans and into the ground. And it doesn't touch her, but that's how close that was. That was a very, very, very close call. We had another negligent discharge, not in my class, but at the shooting range that I use in Texas or in Houston. The owner of the shooting range was leasing out the range to another instructor. That instructor had a medium level CCW concealed carry class. And one of the students wanted to show off and kind of hot rod a little bit. And again, students showing off does not impress me, okay? If you're a quality instructor, students showing off should not impress you either. So this student was trying to show off for his peers and for his instructor to see, and he's moving faster than what he can do safely, and he's drawing his gun from the appendix position, which is right in front here by your belly button. And as he gets his gun out, he's got it stuck in his shirt. So he's got a gun tangled up. He's got his hand and his gun kind of tangled up. So he takes his left hand to go and sort out the mix-up. And as he uses his left hand to approach, and again, when you're using one hand, you're inclined to also use the other hand. And this is something we call sympathetic movement, sympathetic hand movement. So as he's trying to use one hand, he's also using his other hand. He squeezes the trigger pointing at his hand and bang, shoots him directly through the left palm. Negligent discharge. Again, didn't happen in my class, but this one was a very, very vivid one that I remember. The owner of the shooting range, Phil, he called me and debriefed me about the situation so that we could learn about it. There was another one that happened in one of my classes in Southern California. There was a father and a son. This one's very memorable for me. They had brought an AR-15 with some sights on it, the 45-degree sights, and they were just put on in the wrong manner. Okay, they were just not stuck on properly. And so the rear sight was way crooked, and we're trying to shoot, we're trying to do training, and the thing is super, super, super off, like off to the left, and it's just unsafe to use because you can't aim it anymore. So I made a fatal mistake, which is I said, I trusted them at their level that they should be able to load and unload their own gun and be safe with it. And I'm like, hey, you guys just take this gun off the line, go put it away and come back out and rejoin us with your handguns. And so they go and do that, right? Not a big deal. They clear the gun, they set it on the table, they come back, they continue training. We're done with our day of training now, and now they're about to go and put this gun away. So you're going to start seeing a pattern. So as they're packing up the AR-15, they got it pointing up at the sky, some benches, and we have like a big roof over the shooting range there at Lytle Creek in Southern California. And so he's done cleaning up his gun. He makes kind of a half-assed attempt to clear the action, to cycle the action twice. But again, when you cycle the action, you need to let the action slam closed and then open it all the way hard and then slam it closed, open it hard, right? So he's cycling the action like this, controlling it and gently cycling it. You need to be slamming it, right? And so because he's too gentle when he cycles it twice, he exacerbates a previous error, which he made the same exact error that I made during when I was 21, my first negligent discharge. They're still around in the chamber. He has failed to remove the round out of the chamber. He's successfully taken the magazine out, but they're still around in the gun. It's still live. And then he goes to clear it, and he cycles it twice, and he fails to clear that round out after 2 attempts even. And of course, he doesn't actually look in there. He just pushes the trigger. Do we see a problem? Do we see a pattern? The same exact thing that caused me to accidentally almost shoot my friend in the legs caused this guy to shoot a hole through the roof. And more important than that, he and his son are standing right there, and he discharges, and he got the gun pointing up. So he discharges this gun with the muzzle right next to his face. All of us were cleaning up the range. We're picking up brass. We're packing up our equipment, and bang! He fires one into the roof, and I marked my ass over there. I'm like, what just happened, right? He explains to me what just happened. We knock out push-ups, and I get him up there to sign put his name next to the hole that he created. We have a long debrief about this, and it costed me $252 to pay for a replacement roof panel for that shooting range, and it costed me a long and stern conversation with the manager of that shooting range. So hopefully I've given you so many stories about negligent discharges, 2 of my own, one from being ignorant and one from being complacent, and I've shown you some of the patterns that causes students to have negligent discharges on the range. They are self-taught, and they have poor habits. They're unaware, they're subconscious, they're completely unconscious about their bad gun handling habits because they don't have much formal training. They are operating outside of their skill envelope. They're not at a level, they're not at a speed or an intensity where they can safely handle themselves. They're pushing themselves beyond their ability to think through problems. They don't have good habits as far as clearing the gun, the proper procedure for fully clearing a gun properly. They don't have a good set of assumptions about the chamber and its status. All right, so in other words, not having a good understanding of gun safety. Just because you've shot some guns, and just because you have guns, and just because your dad has guns, just because your uncle has taken you shooting, just because your cousin was in the Air Force, your neighbor, your ex-husband was in the police force, none of that matters. Just because they have that experience does not mean that they're qualified to teach you on gun safety, and that therefore you have learned gun safety. Until you fully understand these 3 principles, you do not know gun safety until you can show me that you can do it subconsciously. Just because you know it doesn't mean you know it. Does that make sense? You know it on the conscious level doesn't mean you know it in the subconscious level. So finally, the pattern is that if you're a combination of these things, a complacency with loading and unloading the gun, plus a habitual pulling of the trigger, a habitual finger on the trigger, feeling the trigger, that's a big no-no. Now, where's our saving grace? In all of these circumstances, if the weapon is pointed up or down or at the targets, what we call downrange, up or downrange, then most likely you're going to be okay. If the gun is not loaded, you're probably going to be okay. In other words, even if you pull the trigger, when you weren't thinking you were going to pull the trigger, it might still be acceptable, as in you're not going to kill anybody. Or in my case, I shot the Nerf gun, right? That was my saving grace. And so this is really how the dynamic of those 3 elements, that triad, those 3 things of gun safety, muzzle, finger, and chamber, how they really interplay. As long as you're not pointing at a person at the time when you have this negligent discharge, you will eventually be okay. But we have another student. Let me share one last one. Taylor Schreiber was a good friend of one of my college buddies. Taylor Schreiber worked as the manager for a Big 5. He sold guns for a living. He spent a lot of time around guns, and guess what? They're all unloaded. Because if you work in a gun store, you spend a lot of time. I've seen guys work in a gun store, and they're doing stuff like this. Like, let me double check this. Let me triple check this so I don't shoot myself on camera. And they're just talking to the customer, and they're doing this. I'm like, yo, bro, you're practicing pointing this at yourself. And they'll even I don't even want to do it. Like, they'll point at their hand and they'll dry fire it. And I'm like, you just practice shooting yourself. You're just building repetitions on shooting yourself in the hand. Like, why are you doing that? These guys, they don't even understand. Because unsafe gun handling, even as a professional, it's completely subconscious. So Taylor goes home. He's doing stuff on the computer. He's got his gun next to him on his desk. He's dry practicing with his gun. He's doing whatever. And so he owns a gun called a Smith & Wesson Shield 9mm, which, if you know anything about me, I'm not a fan of that platform. I don't recommend you buy it. I think it's a terrible gun to buy. Don't buy one. But in California, that's one of the few small, inexpensive handguns in 9mm that's available. So he's got a Smith & Wesson Shield. It has a special California compliant safety device. That means you can't pull the trigger until the magazine's inserted. But if you know anything about handguns, if you have a magazine inserted and the magazine's empty, you can't dry fire the gun. So how do you practice with it? So he has installed dummy rounds. Well, you'd think dummy rounds should make it very safe, right? The problem is that with dummy rounds, you're building familiarity with the way it sounds and the way it feels. And a gun with ammunition sounds different than a gun without ammunition. And you'll eventually learn this. It's kind of like driving your car, driving your car, and if you do something wrong, driving your car on a flat tire feels different than driving a car with your tires inflated, for example. There's certain things that just feel different. They have a different sound. They make an extra ka-chunk noise during the loading process. So he's gotten accustomed to practicing with these dummy rounds, and then in order to dry practice it, he cycles the gun, out comes a dummy round, he dry practices, he cycles the gun, out comes a dummy round, and he's dry practicing, he's doing whatever, and he's just kind of messing around without really thinking about it because he's distracted. So this leads into a level of complacency. He puts the gun down, he's doing his stuff, he gets distracted, he picks up his gun, and he dry practices, it goes click, that's fine, he cycles it, and he dry practices it, and this time he's just doing something, whatever, and he's left-handed, he happens to get his hand crossed in front of the barrel, just for a split second, and he presses the trigger without really thinking about it. Again, see a pattern now? Complacency, because you're too familiar with this, and then he's just casually pressing the trigger without really thinking about it, and then he goes bang, and he shot himself through the hand, right here. Because he's left-handed, shot himself through the right hand. How did that happen? Well, he had put down the Shield in 9mm, and then he's doing his stuff, and then without thinking about it, absentmindedly, he picked up his Glock 17 in 9mm, and the Glock 17 had live ammunition in it, and it had nothing in the chamber, so the first time he dry practiced, no big deal. He cycled the slide, it makes the extra chunk noise when it chambers around, also no big deal, because he's gotten to the point where he's familiar with the sound. He's become complacent with the feeling and the sensation and the sound of loading the round. And so in his mind, he's still thinking that this is his Shield, Smith & Wesson Shield with dummy rounds, and now he's holding the Glock 17 with live rounds, and then he's become complacent about where he's pointing it, complacent about pressing the trigger because he's gotten so comfortable handling guns that do not go bang when you press the trigger. Bang, he shoots himself in the hand. And to add insult to injury, he calls his neighbors for help. They panic, they call the police. The police arrest him and charge him with a crime for shooting himself. I mean, go figure, right? And so this is how Taylor and I met, because his friend introduced us, and he came to me for a gun safety class. And his sin, his punishment was that if he would tell the story of his failing and his lesson learned to my class of 12 students, that the students could learn from this lesson, that we could document it for future students such as this. Future students could learn about this, and that the judge would dismiss his charge, a misdemeanor for unsafe discharge or negligent discharge of a firearm. So do you want that to be you? Where you get complacent, you get careless, or you are ignorant, and that you accidentally or carelessly shoot yourself, or shoot your floor, or shoot your dog, or shoot your car, and you end up getting arrested, end up getting charged with a crime for accidentally shooting something? Like, having a gun is a great responsibility. Having a gun can be very exciting. Going to gun training or shooting range can be very fun, very exciting, and good quality time with your friends and family members. But when you own this gun, you now have some extra responsibilities. So this is, I hope, it's a bit of a long video, but I hope that you find it to be valuable, that I share with you all these experiences of negligent discharges, and every one of them has a lesson learned attached to it, and also has a great potential for injury attached to it. So don't waste these stories. If you take these stories in very seriously, this could prevent you from having to go through the same thing, getting arrested, shooting yourself, paying for the repairs to the shooting range, in a stern conversation with someone's like, you let your student have a negligent discharge on my range, right? So anyways, my name is Brian Wang. If you have other questions, email me, comment below, whatever. Find us at monarchdefense.org. We have classes every week, every couple of days, or sometimes even 6-7 classes a week in the San Francisco Bay Area in California. So if you're curious to know more, get in contact with me. I'm easy to find. Take care, be safe. Make sure that you're paying attention to gun safety.